Ascough is a former paramedic in both the NHS and the British Army. He has been involved in UFO research now for over 50 years, and his first book, UFOs, The Real Story, is a refreshing new slant on the subject of UFOs. It looks at the bigger picture with all of its complexities and is interlaced with many of the author's own sightings throughout his life. And Paul is joining us now. Hi, Paul.
Good afternoon or morning or wherever it is, wherever you are in the world.
It's
nice to be here.
It's probably both somewhere in the world at this point in time, Paul. But your new book, UFOs: The Real Story, really refreshing, as I mentioned in the introduction. So, what do you mean by the real story?
Well, the real story, what I wished to do was a lot of the UFO books that are out, and a lot of, nothing against a lot of the investigators that are out there. There's some really intelligent people doing a lot of really good work. However, now I have said that, there are a lot of people that just do like, we'll say, for argument's sake, the Roswell incident, the Pascagoula incident, the Belgian UFO wave, Lonnie Zamora, Rendlesham Forest, and they stick to what I would say a piece of the pie, and they're not giving people the whole picture. And what I have sort of experienced myself throughout my life and the investigations that I've done, is obviously there's a lot more going on. And as I've got more, dare I say, more mature and more experience, I've realized that the paranormal, UFOs, there are a lot of things, cryptids, there's a lot of things that are all interconnected. And it's like one common denominator that runs through it all. And a lot of people are missing the point. So I liken it to, they do the segments of the orange, and rather than doing one segment of an orange or one piece or slice of a pizza, I wanted to do the whole thing and give people an idea that there is, scientific reasoning. But not that I'm a scientist in the slightest, I'm just a normal guy who's trying to put things into normal words so that people can understand it.
Mm-hmm. Well, Ray Hernandez, who spoke with us last year, I mean, he's done a lot of research on both the UFO, the alien phenomena, the paranormal, and he says UFOs, aliens, near-death experiences, ghosts, orbs. He says, like you say, they're all interrelated.
Yeah, they are. Would you like me to expand on that then?
Well, yes, for sure, because my question was going to be alien abductions and paranormal events. You mentioned in the book overlap. So what do you mean by that?
Right. What I mean by overlap is, if you look, just take a step back and look at the electromagnetic spectrum. Now we have an electromagnetic spectrum and our ordinary matter and energy that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. Of the things that we know, like on the higher frequencies, you have radio waves, and then it comes down through the infrared to what we can hear on the acoustic spectrum and what we see in visible light. And then it goes down through ultraviolet, and then X-rays and gamma rays at the bottom. That's just what we know about. Now, the cosmologists and the people with better brains than I, they're sort of bandying about at the moment figures between 75 and 95% of the energy that's available in the universe is is dark matter and dark energy between 75 to 95%. Now, they're saying it's there, and they're saying that's what makes up the majority of the universe and the energy within the universe, because everything is energy and it all reacts and interreacts all the time. But looking at their figures, we are from the radio waves at the high end through our visible spectrum to the gamma rays at the bottom end. That's only 5% of what our scientific knowledge currently publicly that is available, that we're aware of. And therefore, it becomes quite clear once you take the step back and you grasp that there's a whole spectrum out there that's way, way, way beyond that. So you imagine the, if you like, as an example, the steps, the strides that we've made in the last 100 years. Where you were 100 years ago, everybody was on a horse. very, very few people had a motor car, and the odd times you did go anywhere long distance, you went on the railroad when you were in America.
Right.
So look how things have moved on in the last 100 years, just that we're aware of. Now, you imagine any other race, and there are lots of them, that could be 1,000 years, could be 10,000 years in front of us in technology, in spirituality, and in normal development. So therefore, what I try and point out to people is that these, I'll say ET, these visitors we get, I'll just say ET as a way of, and I don't mean the ETH as in the extraterrestrial hypothesis, but they are around us all the time. And because they are masters of the whole of the spectrum, not just the 5% that we're aware of, that is the, if you like, their control mechanism and why they can do what they do. I go into more depth than that, but that's just to give you an overall idea. Yeah.
Well, that's fascinating, because I was listening to an interview recently with Roberta Grimes, who's an expert on the near-death experience, and she was talking about frequencies, and she talked about the fact that you know, that we are in the midst of so many dimensions and that are around us, but because we are on a low frequency, or our frequency level, we don't have that frequency level to be able to pick these beings up in other dimensions that are basically here around us, and we can't tune into them. Yeah,
right. I'll give you another analogy that listeners may find easier to grasp, and that is, if you imagine an old vinyl record, right? The old vinyl record, and we are on a vinyl record, and that is the plane, if you like, the frequency, the 5% that we are on. Now, that is just all we're aware of. The thing is, there's a whole stack of these records, all at a different vibration, all at a different frequency. Some are lower than us and some are higher than us. So you'll get ET who might be 10 records in the stack above us. Now, we are not aware of them, but because of their technological advances, they're able to detune their frequency, if you like, and lower their vibration to come to visit us. Excuse me. And that is one of the ways that, excuse me, I've got a tickle.
That's all right.
But that is one of the ways how they are able to tune their frequency, and we're not. And that is how everything that you have, if I just, a little sideways thing from it, a little sideways step, every thought that you have is an energy. Your whole body is an energy. It's like if I met you in real life, or if anybody meets anybody in real life for that matter, you know immediately if you get along with that person, even if they've been very polite or whatever. You know, because your magnetic frequency that you're giving off, your aura, touches their aura. Your magnetic field will feel their magnetic field. So you know immediately, it's a subconscious level, whether you're going to get on with that person or not. Now, the chair you're sat on, the room you sat in, the computer you're looking at, the fabric of the building that you're in now, all have a magnetic frequency that all will react to everything around it. So if you imagine that's going on all the time, there are all these frequencies that interact with each other. ET that can control the frequencies, and listeners forgive me for just referring, it's just easy to refer to it as ET, because they're complete masters of controlling the magnetic frequencies and the energy that's around it. That is why they're around us all the time, and that is why we often get, we'll use the UFOs as an example, where you'll get things where people can see UFOs, but they're not picked up on radar. You'll get them sat in the watchtower saying, I can see it over the airfield, but nothing on my radar. Or they can pick things up on the radar, but they can't physically see anything. And that is why also you will get UFOs that will just disappear in the blink of an eye, because they're literally just tuning the frequency out. Right. There are other instances like in America, the Gaffney incident was one where a young couple saw a UFO and it was like a silhouette, they said. You could see it was transparent. And as it approached their position over some shrubbery and trees, the trees set on fire. And then the UFO became solid before it zoomed off. These guys, apart from being dumbfounded and frightened to start with, then phoned the authorities. But by the time the fire and police turned up, it was long gone. And they just put the fire service, put the bushes out, the trees out, and the police just took the statement. But if you look at it from a magnetic point of view, the frequency that's directly next to our visible wavelengths is infrared, which generates heat. So it would be quite logical that's what happened. And we have the same in the UK with Malcolm Robinson, bless him, that did the Decmont Woods with Robert Taylor incident. And that was the same, where it appeared initially to Robert Taylor see-through, and then it solidified, and then the two balls came towards him. And it's just literally tuning the frequency. One thing you get with abductees, which as an investigator we all hear constantly, was that they just appeared at the side of me, or they floated me out through the ceiling, they floated me out through the door, or the closed door even, or through a wall. And that's simply because they're able to tune that frequency, so you're not physically there. You're on a different record altogether. So that isn't a hindrance to them. It's not a barrier. And it's the same with another thing where people, quite common with abductees and people with sightings. And this is not just specifically UFOs, but often cryptids like Bigfoot, or in the paranormal with ghosts and other spiritual things, where people say there was absolute silence. There was no wind, there was no background noise of whatever, birds in the trees. It was absolute silence. And that's because they've been tuned out of our normal spectrum, off our normal record. So there's no background noise to hear. And also one of the things that I say was, I believed that we have this mechanism, if you like, where if you are subject to that, your body, your soul, which knows the frequency that it should be at, recognizes that you are going somewhere that you shouldn't be. And I'm not saying it happens all the time, but I think this may account for witnesses' accounts of being terrified, because it comes from a visceral terror, a fear, because their soul knows that they're not where they should be. They're being taken out of their natural frequency. Right. If that makes sense.
So, no, it does to me anyway. But it's a tough subject to get your head around. So, in a sense, so we're living in parallel planes of reality with other beings.
Yes. And the problem that we have is, at the moment, we only know of the record that we're on, and we're not aware that there are all these others around us all the time.
So can these events occur to people at any time?
Yes, in a nutshell, is the short answer. But having said that, if you notice, a lot of paranormal things and UFOs happen when people are quieter and at night time. Now, I've tried to think about this, and logically, during the day when people are busy, we're very materialistic, we're very driven by what we are, our specific environment and what we're dealing and coping with and living in at the time. So if you imagine from ET's point of view, when they want to tune into anything of us, it's much easier for them to get people when it's quiet. And also, people are more relaxed. The sort of hypnopompic and hypnagogic phases that we go through when we're sleeping or going to sleep and waking up, that's when you're at your, dare I say, most open. So that's when you're most likely to pick up a different frequency. And the ET, I mean, if you look at it from a logical point of view, or even from a practical point of view, if you want to look at something specific and tune into something specifically, it would make sense not to do things in the middle of the day when everybody's going about the business and it's very busy, everything going on. And see, the factories and everything else, normal business, make a lot of background electromagnetic radiation. So it would make sense to wait until the wee small hours, if you like, when it's much quieter, so there's much less interference and makes your job much easier to tune into a person or
that's my favourite part of the day, the early morning, heading in towards dawn. I remember Neil Donald Walsh, when he tells his story, his conversations with God. He was up at 4 a.m. and he just sat and was quiet, and then all of a sudden it started, and he was being given this information.
Yeah.
So it's quite fascinating.
There's one of the things which I have always said is because people say, if you've been abducted once, have you been abducted again? I'll just use Calvin Parker as an example, bless him. He's been quite poorly, but thankfully on the mend at the moment. So fingers crossed, and our prayers are with Calvin and hope that he continues to improve. But Calvin only naturally remembered the Pascagoula incident when he was with Charles Hickson. And Calvin was only a young guy at the time. He was absolutely terrified. So that was one of the reasons he kept a low profile as long as he did. Because using his words, he said, I'd lost it, But years later, more recently, it was regressed by Kath Marden. And he found that he'd actually had 4 abductions, 2 as a boy and 2 as an adult. But he didn't actually recollect those. And I did you've heard of Bufora, the British UFO research. I did some investigating with them for a number of years. And one of the things which I believe, which came to me or was made me more aware of it, was that ET can alter your memories. Now, if you think it's just an energy, your brains work off electrical energy and everything around you. So if they are so in control of it, they can remember and control what you remember. So that's when you get people that don't remember anything at all and they get missing time. People that maybe see a lot of abductees say they've seen owls, or even just a vehicle at the side of the road, things like that. And they're just able to put supplemental memories in. And I don't know whether it's an odd act of kindness that you don't remember the full thing. And the guy, one of the guys, this was 4 adults that I investigated for Bufora. And the guy afterwards, he said, I could only remember maybe a quarter of what happened. And he says, I can clearly remember thinking how it has suddenly got dark. He says, I don't remember dusk. Suddenly it was dark. And he said, if you imagine your memory, your normal memory, as the old VHS videotape, he says, I felt like it had been cut into segments. And some of the segments were missing and some had been put back in the wrong order. And he said, and I just don't have those memories. But if you're able to control the frequency that memory would logically be with you, that's why this happens.
Well, this next question, I'm not sure whether you can answer it, but you're probably going to give us the answer to the meaning of life if you can. But what's the bigger picture here, Paul? I mean, what is it?
Well, this is going really deep, but if you we'll use the record, use the analogy of the record. So you are, but the LP, right? The hole in the center is purity, which somebody would call God, okay? And the outside of the record or the LP would be evil. I'm not going to say the devil, no such thing. I don't believe in religion per se. I think that there are good and bad in all religions, and you will always get good and bad people in all religions.
Right.
However, if you imagine the grooves on the record where you actually put the stylus to play the music, if you imagine each of those grooves is a separate life, so that you are somewhere on this record in this plane, and you are somewhere in your groove learning this life's lesson. Now, it's no good if you know what the lesson is, because that would defeat the object of it. And as we're going back to electromagnetic frequencies for a little while, if you imagine it's by your own morals and your own ethics that you have to drag yourself up and sort of be nice to people. It's the way you think, the way you do things, the way you treat people. And by being nice with people, you're lifting your vibration and you're progressing towards that hole in the center. Now, I'm not saying by any stretch of the imagination you're going to do it in 1 or 2 goes. This takes hundreds and hundreds maybe. But the problem is that people don't realize that your attitude now is the attitude you take with you when you pass on to the next groove. And it's just like, and death's nothing to fear, it's just the body that dies. The soul will carry on as normal. But it's just like getting rid of the old model car and getting a new car. And that literally is it. But your thought processes are still the same. So you have to progress, you have to lift yourself and raise your vibration. And it's by doing that that we improve and progress towards purity, if you like, and the hole in the center. Now, I've said that, this is true for ET as well. They're on the same journey as we, but they're just on a higher frequency. So they have to abide by this law, if you like, this unwritten rule of the universe, that every single being has to improve by its own efforts. Does that make sense?
It does to me. The record analogy, funny enough, I was watching a movie on Netflix called Synchronic, and they use the same record analogy on that movie, but
really?
in relation to time travel. So
oh yeah,
it's probably going to be a bit deep for me to try and explain it, and probably will take me a long time, Paul. But so you mentioned religion, so and I just get the feeling, too many people put religion in a box.
yes.
Is that the way you see it?
Yes, absolutely. You see, at the end of the day, if you imagine religion doesn't even come into it. All religion is man-made. God never wrote anything down, whether you call him God, whether you call him Allah, whatever you want to call him, Buddha. It's all, well, whatever you call him, it's all man-made. And whatever religion you are, your journey to the center of the record is the same for anybody. And as we're all aware, you do get good and not so good people in all religions. So religion don't even come into it on a personal and spiritual journey. And that is what I believe life is about.
I mean, do you know what that spiritual journey is, or more to the point, do you know what the lessons we're here to learn and teach are?
It's different for everybody, but at the same time, it's the same for everybody. And it literally is to improve yourself and to lift your vibration and to be a better person than you were last time, and to try and help other people, to try and, just have good morals, have good ethics,
Yeah. And then you say, you talk about, then you move on. Where do we move on to?
Well, that is the thing, is as you move forward, you become more pure. And in my mind, rightly or wrongly, as you become, dare I say, more towards the center of the record, then you will become more of a teacher, more helping other people. Now, I'm not saying I am. This is just thoughts that have evolved over the last 50 years. And it's just sort of, to me, it's quite logical. It's quite straightforward. Now, I am fully aware that it's very difficult in our society as we are, especially at the moment, that people do fall by the wayside and fall foul of materialistic and pressures, peer pressures and everything around them.
Yeah.
But that's part of the normal human psyche. That's our foibles that we have to get over.
Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of going off into rabbit holes here, but you know, we're talking about moving on. So we're talking about our soul moving on, and
yeah,
because you know, you often hear. I mean, I'm just fascinated. I just with the near-death experience and the pre-death topic that they talk about us not being our body, but being, you know,
yeah.
whoever we are in our body, and you know, when it's all over, we go and then we move on to something else.
Yeah. Then we move on to hopefully a higher frequency, a better vibration, having learned a lesson and forever moving forwards. And to me, it's a part, sort of, there's no such single person as God. It's how we would become part of it. And I think from a biblical point of view, I'm only saying that because I was brought up Christian, but where Jesus said the only way to God is through me, I think, again, that's quite logical because he was giving a good example. And if we could be as good an example as he was, then obviously we would have progressed further towards the center of the record. So it would be logical to say the only way through God is through me, because you're gradually becoming as good as he was, and then hopefully better.
I just published an article recently, just before we did this interview, regarding the walk-in or the soul transfer, where people can have a soul exchange or a soul transfer midlife or at some point in their life where the previous soul just is too weary to carry on and it's replaced. And this is like done in a contract form before the whole thing, before that person's life begins. But I interviewed Sheila Seppi, and you know, terrific knowledge on this topic. And she said one thing when she was being regressed by Barbara Lamb. She said that she saw her soul transfer take place where the new soul came in and pushed out she called it the weary old soul, which was then taken to a ship which was waiting for it. I thought, a ship? So my next question was then, does that mean as a soul, you know, as a being, are we actually a race of ET that you know, gets sent to various parts of the universe to inhabit, you know, physical entities and experience that life, and when it's all over, we move on to somewhere else?
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you think about it, they're going through exactly the same process that we are. Therefore, it would be logical that at some point in your learning and lessons in the curriculum of the school we're all going through, you will have lessons with ET, if you like. That will happen. I have had quite a few paranormal things as well that have sort of led me to believe this. And it's not just, may I tell you about my first UFO sighting?
Yes.
Because this is what set me off. When I was 10 years old, we moved to a new home, and it was on the edge of a village. Now we're talking 1967, 68. So it's a long time ago. It was a village in the countryside, so there was no light pollution like there is now. And my father was really strict, and not that it was cruel, but what he said went. And my brother and I, our last job of the day was taking our dog and the neighbour's dog, who was quite disabled, taking their dogs for a walk. Then we bring them home, put them away, say goodnight to our parents and go to bed. And that became the routine. So one night we'd been out, my brother and I, we came back, put the dogs away, and my father was in the front garden. Now our home was right on the edge of the village, and from our front gate was just miles of fields and fields and fields, reasonably flat terrain looking due east. And my father was in the garden looking at his roses, and we came in, and the sky looking to the north was completely covered in cloud. And we had a real sharp bank of cloud, and to the south the sky was completely clear. It was just getting dark, and the major constellations were beginning to appear. So my father, he had a telescope, but he wasn't an astronomer. He was just somebody with an interest. and it was like pointing things out to us. So we're as young boys looking. And as the three of us were looking at the sky, two UFOs suddenly zoomed out of this bank of cloud really quickly and then just stopped dead. Now, there was like a V formation, but one missing. So one was slightly to one side and slightly behind the other. They both acted as if they were joined together, but there was nothing apparently between them. They were stationary for maybe only a few seconds, and you could actually, they were brilliant sort of pearly white, and you could see the light from them actually shining, reflecting off the cloud. And then suddenly they started moving very quickly away from us. There was no acceleration, there was no noise throughout, no apparent rotation. One thing I did notice was as they were moving away from us, there was the tiniest little teardrop shape formed at the back of them. Right. And to me, it was like there was some sort of envelope, if you like, that was just being, that was showing, you know, that, but there was no sound whatsoever. And as they went away from us down the edge of this bank of cloud, as they got close, you could see the light of them, and as they got further away, you couldn't. But at the same time as they came out of the cloud, I got a voice in my head that I could hear quite clearly, and it was sort of, oops, we hadn't meant to have been seen. They didn't mean to come out of the cloud.
Right, right.
I got that quite clearly in my head, and my father didn't, and my brother didn't. And we were all three stood there sort of agape in silence looking at this, and probably had them in sight altogether for 30 seconds until they disappeared in the distance. Mm-hmm. And my father, who had done his national service with the RAF, he was the first to speak, and he said, well, there's nothing that we have that can do that.
Yeah,
and
wow.
It was from that moment on that it was something that was so obviously alien, that I wanted to know the nuts and bolts of it. How can something like that physically work, you know?
Yeah. Are you familiar with the Burton Dassett lights? Back in, I think it was 1923. Really? I interviewed Richard Rokeby, who'd covered that, and just released a book about the Burton Dassett UFO events, and he calls it The Lights Upon the Hill. It happened in 1923, and just similar to what you're describing now. It may explain why those lights were there, because back then they were people described them as ghosts, because UFO wasn't a term.
No. Well, I mean, if you think just going back to the 60s and 70s with the George Adamskis and Elizabeth Clara that we were all familiar with then, that were in the news, if you like, and but everything was flying saucers from outer space. Mm-hmm. After that was the coin, it was termed, everybody, it was like Major Donald Keogh when he wrote his book, it was always visitors from outer space. Now that things have moved on, we're not sure that it is outer space. And that is one of the things where I going back to the electromagnetic spectrum, Kath Marden, Bud Hopkins, Dolores Cannon, these sort of people that, I was very fortunate to meet Bud Hopkins. He came over one year as one of the speakers for Bufora, and I was very fortunate just to sit with him and chat to him and have lunch. And he said, Paul, I got into this quite by accident. And he really wanted to be a counsellor, to help people. He was an artist, but wanted to do more with people, and started doing the regressive hypnotherapy. And he said, it began to dawn on me that whatever part of life these people, whether they were a bus driver or whether they were a CEO of a big company, all these people were having the same experience. And wherever they were in the world, they were all narrating the same story. And he said, I began to think there's obviously something more to it. And he says, eventually, it got to the point where it took over,
Yeah. So why can't we remember our previous lives? Is there a reason for that?
Absolutely. What's the point of if somebody told you the answer to the exam, it'd be no good, would it? Sorry, excuse me.
That's okay.
Yeah. it's by your own effort and changing the way that you think and your own thoughts that are the energy and the intention behind it. And that's what makes the difference, by being able to keep that up, if you like, and not slip.
Yeah, yeah. You know what I think? I think we owe Shirley MacLaine a really, really big apology. No, of course.
Sorry.
Shirley MacLaine, famous American actress, and of course she talks about her past lives and talks about her out-of-body experiences, and she was essentially made fun of, back in the 60s, I think 70s and 80s. But since people are now starting to understand that this actual experience is probably real, I guess they've lightened off a bit. But she was the butt of a lot of jokes.
Yeah, I want to say, I bet she got a lot of stick at the time.
Yeah. Paul, in the book, I mean, it's a fantastic read, but you don't really expand, because there's so much in there that you could probably write, 10, 20,000 pages on. Is there any reason why you kind of kept it concise?
Yeah. One of the things which I think I actually say it in the book is there are some brilliant authors out there, some brilliant minds, and people have gone into a lot of depth on a lot of subjects. One of the reasons I've done things the way I have is just to try and cram a lot of different things in and just try and explain it, as if you like, as the segments of the orange, and show people that there are a lot of different parts to it. And it's just to get people's interest and say, I need to think outside the box. There is more to this. Maybe I should be reading more on that and doing more research along this subject. So it wasn't that I didn't want to go into the depth. I would have had a book of 1,000 pages. Mm-hmm. It was just to try and show people little pieces of the pie, so that people were aware that there are a lot more pieces out there, rather than just sticking to one subject.
Okay. So last question then, the truth that people are seeking, is it there? Is it hidden in plain sight?
Yes, is a short answer. To me, the truth is what we've already been discussing. And the ET is around us all the time. They're on the same universal lessons as we are. And one of the analogies that I make in the book is, you do get witness statements where people, abductees too, and some are terrified, and some I think they're wonderful, and you do get that difference of different types of ET and different ways that the abductees are treated. Now, it's difficult looking at it as a whole to say, well, yes, there's going to be 10 different types of ET, and they'll treat you nicely, they'll treat you like lab rats, they'll kill you, or do whatever, because I think there's a whole spectrum. And like, as we are too, you will get good and bad ET, even if they're on the same learning curve that we are. There still will be good and bad on their side.
Right.
So it's a bit like, I think, as a general, I know I'm putting it as a general thing, but if you imagine, if we, as you're aware where you are, there'll be nature reserves, and every so often people will go in and they'll put nets up and they'll catch the birds and they'll measure them. And it's not that they're being cruel to them. And that's why I say, maybe they're doing the same with us. Maybe they're just making sure we're reporting and developing as we should. And maybe they're just ringing us and treating us the same.
Right.
And maybe it's a bizarre way of kindness that we don't remember all that we should.
Okay, the book is called UFOs, The Real Story. Are you planning a follow-up?
Well, as you've just said, I haven't gone into any great depth in there. But Philip Mantle asked me the same question a few days ago. And I keep saying, maybe, maybe not. But the more I do this, the more I think I do need to go into more depth. So
I think one topic that probably needs to be looked at in more depth is the topic of frequencies and the levels, and then what we can do. I mean, we've got the the CE5 groups, for example, who go out and, you know, reach certain levels of consciousness to make contact with ETs. But I mean, something in book form on frequencies, I think would be fantastic, because it's tough to understand. And if it can be explained in the right way, I think a lot of people will get this.
Yeah, I agree with you. And that is why one of the reasons I've done is try to put it in a normal layman's terms to make it easy for them to understand. Because if you think where some authors, and I'm not going to mention any names, but they tend to go off on a scientific tangent, and it's difficult. People often want to read something that's entertaining, and they can, if you like, they can compare themselves with. And to not be able to do that and to take it beyond what the normal layman can read and understand, I think is a mistake. So when you're going into more depth, you have to be careful that you can still put it in a language that people understand and will accept.
Yeah, I mean, even what we're talking about today, Paul, there'll be pushback on that, because as you mentioned, people want entertainment. They just want black and white. And a lot of people, all they want to believe is that ET is real, but he comes here in a spaceship from another galaxy, and he hovers in the sky above us. But they don't. A lot of people don't really want to hear about other dimensions, and they can slip in and out, and because it kind of kills. I think it kills the romance for them.
Well, maybe so, but that doesn't get away from the truth.
Yeah.
This is how that these dimensions are around us all the time. ET is around us all the time, and for me, one of the things that may help people is, not as a religion, but on a spiritual side of things. The normal psychic mediums that are good, and there are charlatans out there, don't get me wrong, but I met an old lady called Betty who she'd be talking to me, and then she'd stop and she'd talk to somebody else at the side of it. And this woman lived in this twilight zone that was like mind-blowing for me as a teenager at the time. It was like, you know, as she lost it, as she got dementia, but then when people say things to you and do things, it's like, I was an avid reader when I was much younger as a teenager. After seeing my first UFO book, you couldn't just go on the internet. There wasn't internet then. You had to get on the local transport or get your parents to take you to a bigger city that would find a library or a bookstore that would even stock books on UFOs and the paranormal. Yeah, because they didn't, you know. And I distinctly remember one day coming from our home, and we used to actually walk past the spiritualist church, and this old guy stood outside having a cigarette, and he said, "Paul, have you got a minute?" And I went over, and he sort of waved me over, and I don't think I actually spoke. And I went up to him, and he said, "Just a minute." And he got this scrappy bit of paper out of his pocket, got a pen, and he wrote something down. He showed me this piece of paper, and there was the 3 letters on it, UFO. Wow. And he just said, "I've been told by Spirit to tell you that you're thinking along the right lines." Wow. And that was it. And it was like, and I didn't know this man. And I mean, even then, the rest of my family weren't aware that I was an avid reader and was getting into it that much. So my family wouldn't have known particularly, even if they'd have known this guy, you know. And it was things like that make you stop in your tracks and think, my God, you know, how did that happen, you know? Yeah, and that's fascinating stuff, Paul. We could talk about this all day, but we need to cut it short. But I really enjoyed having you speak with us, and I'd love to have you on as a guest again. Now that it's been established that we're both Leeds United men. But you know, if you do another book, for sure, you know, get in touch with us, and we'll have another talk. Yeah, well, it's out. Philip's got it out on Saturday, on May the 1st, as a paperback and as an ebook, but it's also will be available very shortly as an audio book as well. Okay, fantastic. Paul, thank you. Thank you very much, Dean. That's Paul Ascough joining us.